The people who walk away when you lose everything were never waiting for your comeback. Malcolm Ellison was 40 years old when he lost his job. Until that Thursday afternoon, he believed it would be the hardest day of his life. For 16 years, he had built a respected career as a senior operations director at one of Charlotte's largest manufacturing companies. He had never missed a mortgage payment, never carried credit card debt, and never complained about the long hours. Every sacrifice had been for the future he and his wife, Celeste Vaughan, believed they were building together. Malcolm valued stability over appearances, loyalty over status. He believed marriage was supposed to survive difficult seasons, not just celebrate the easy ones. At 4:18 p.m., he walked through the company's glass doors carrying a plain cardboard box. Inside were framed family photos, a coffee mug his late mother had given him, a leather notebook filled with years of ideas, and the brass nameplate that no longer belonged on the 20th floor. The parking lot was unusually quiet. A warm Carolina breeze pushed dry leaves across the pavement as employees drifted toward their cars carrying identical boxes. An international merger had eliminated an entire division. Hundreds of careers had ended before sunset. Malcolm unlocked his dark gray pickup and set the box carefully on the passenger seat. He didn't start the engine. His phone remained silent. No calls, no messages. He rested both hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield. The job was gone, oddly enough. Panic never came, careers ended. People adapted, life moved on. After a long breath, he started the truck and drove home. The familiar streets of Charlotte looked exactly the same. The traffic lights followed their usual rhythm. But something felt different when Malcolm stepped through the front door. The scent of expensive candles drifted through the living room. Celeste stood beside the kitchen island, still wearing her tailored blazer. A large suitcase waited beside the front entrance. She didn't ask about his day. She didn't look at the cardboard box in his hands. She looked at him for only a moment before turning her eyes toward the front window. Malcolm placed the box beside the staircase and loosened his tie. His wedding ring caught the fading afternoon light. Silence settled between them. It stretched longer with every passing second. Then, without saying a word, Celeste reached for the handle of her suitcase. Celeste wrapped her fingers around the suitcase handle and pulled it across the hardwood floor with slow, deliberate steps. The wheels clicked against every seam in the boards, filling the house with a sound Malcolm knew he would remember long after that evening ended. He watched her without speaking. She stopped beside the front door and reached for a small envelope resting on the entry table. She placed it beside his truck keys with careful precision. "I think this is the right decision," she said quietly. Malcolm looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "When did you decide that?" he asked. Celeste inhaled slowly before answering. "Not today." The words settled heavily in the room. Malcolm nodded once. "I understand." She looked surprised by the absence of anger. She had expected questions, maybe an argument, perhaps even a promise that everything would change. Instead, Malcolm simply stood there with both hands resting naturally at his sides. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past the house, before disappearing around the corner. Somewhere down the street, children laughed as bicycles crossed the sidewalk. Ordinary sounds continued while an entire chapter of his life quietly closed behind his own front door. Celeste glanced around the living room. Family photographs still lined the shelves. Vacation souvenirs remained exactly where she had placed them years earlier. Nothing inside the house suggested that either of them had imagined this moment. "You are a good man, Malcolm," she finally said. "But being a good man is not always enough." Malcolm lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. "Maybe." She hesitated as if waiting for him to stop her. When he did not move, she opened the front door. Cool evening air drifted into the hallway. A silver luxury sedan pulled smoothly against the curb. The driver remained inside with both hands on the steering wheel. Malcolm recognized neither the vehicle nor the man behind the glass. Celeste lifted the suitcase into the trunk, closed it gently, and walked around the passenger side without turning back. Seconds later the car disappeared beyond the neighborhood entrance. Malcolm remained where he was until the taillights vanished completely. Only then did he pick up the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded letter. The first page explained that she intended to file for divorce within the week. The second page listed financial accounts, property information, and suggested next steps prepared with unusual detail. Malcolm noticed several colored tabs marking important sections. None of it looked rushed. None of it looked emotional. He folded every page back into place exactly as he had found it. His phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. An unfamiliar email notification appeared across the screen. The subject line contained only 6 words. Confidential meeting confirmed. Attendance required tomorrow morning. Malcolm barely slept. The digital clock beside the bed changed 1 minute at a time, while the rest of the house remained completely still. Just before sunrise, he folded the blanket, straightened the pillows out of habit, and walked into the kitchen. A ceramic mug waited on the counter beside the coffee maker. He filled it without thinking. Steam curled upward as the first light reached the windows. His phone rested beside the mug. The email remained unread except for the subject line. Malcolm unlocked the screen and opened the message. It contained only a time, an address in downtown Charlotte, a conference room number, and one sentence at the bottom. Confidentiality remains legally required until public announcement. He recognized the sender immediately. 6 months earlier, a venture capital firm from Austin had approached him with an unusual proposal after reading a white paper he had written years before. During weekends and late evenings, Malcolm had quietly developed an industrial logistics software platform designed to reduce warehouse delays across large manufacturing networks. The project had never been connected to his employer. He had funded every stage himself, refusing outside attention while patent applications and regulatory reviews remained incomplete. The negotiations had stretched through countless video meetings, legal reviews, and technical demonstrations. Even Celeste never knew how far the discussions had progressed, because every document carried strict confidentiality clauses. Malcolm had planned to tell her only after every signature became permanent. At exactly 8:30 that morning, he entered a modern office tower overlooking the city skyline. A receptionist greeted him by name before leading him into a private conference room, where 4 executives were already waiting. Thick folders rested neatly in front of each chair. A large display screen showed the logo of a national technology investment group. The oldest executive stood first and offered a firm handshake. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison. We are pleased to inform you that every remaining condition has been satisfied." Malcolm thanked him quietly before taking his seat. The meeting lasted less than 40 minutes. Final documents were reviewed 1 page at a time. Every signature received careful attention. Every number matched the previous draft. When the final page was complete, the lead attorney slid a polished wooden box across the table. Inside rested a single engraved pen and a letter of congratulations. "The public announcement is scheduled for next Tuesday," the executive said with a smile. "Until then, absolute discretion remains essential." Malcolm closed the box and slipped it into his briefcase. As he stepped outside, his phone vibrated again. A text message from Celeste appeared on the screen. It contained only 1 sentence. "I will have my attorney contact you this afternoon." The following Monday arrived with gray skies hanging over Charlotte. Malcolm parked outside the county courthouse, 15 minutes early, and remained inside his truck until the dashboard clock reached exactly 9 o'clock. A thin folder rested on the passenger seat, beside the wooden presentation box from the previous meeting. He left both items, where they were before walking toward the entrance. Inside, polished floors reflected the overhead lights while quiet conversations echoed through the hallway. Celeste stood near a row of chairs, speaking with a sharply dressed attorney carrying a leather portfolio. She wore a cream-colored business suit that matched the confident smile she greeted him with. There was no bitterness in her expression, only certainty. Malcolm returned the greeting with a calm nod. The attorney introduced himself, reviewed several documents, and explained each step with practiced efficiency. Property disclosures, financial statements, and procedural timelines followed one another in orderly fashion. Malcolm listened carefully before signing where required. He never rushed. He never argued over a single sentence. When the final page was complete, the attorney stacked every document neatly inside the portfolio. "I appreciate how professionally you handled this," he said. Malcolm simply thanked him. Celeste watched him for a long moment. "I thought this would be harder," she admitted. Malcolm slipped his pen into his jacket pocket. "Sometimes people make peace with reality faster than expected." She interpreted the answer as quiet acceptance. The hearing concluded within half an hour. Outside the courthouse, sunshine finally broke through the clouds. Celeste glanced toward a black luxury sport utility vehicle waiting near the curb. The same man Malcolm had briefly seen days earlier stepped out and opened the passenger door for her. He appeared polished, successful, and entirely comfortable with the attention. Before walking away, Celeste paused. "I truly hope everything works out for you," she said. Malcolm offered a small smile. "I hope you find what you are looking for." She thanked him before joining the waiting vehicle. It pulled smoothly into traffic and disappeared beyond the intersection. Malcolm remained standing on the courthouse steps for another minute before returning to his truck. His phone buzzed almost immediately. A notification from a national business news outlet appeared across the screen. The embargo date had officially moved forward. Public release scheduled tomorrow at 9:30 Eastern Time. Malcolm read the message twice before locking the screen. Across town, inside a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, Celeste lifted a glass during lunch with friends. Someone asked whether she regretted ending the marriage. She smiled confidently before answering. "Sometimes you have to leave the past behind before your future can begin." None of the people seated around that table realized that less than 24 hours later, every television in the country would be saying Malcolm Ellison's name. At exactly 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, every major business network interrupted its regular programming with the same breaking headline. A nationwide technology investment group announced the acquisition of an advanced logistics software platform developed by Charlotte entrepreneur Malcolm Ellison. The agreement, valued at $280 million, immediately became one of the largest private technology acquisitions in the region that year. Reporters described the platform as a breakthrough capable of reducing supply chain delays across manufacturing, medical distribution, and retail logistics. Several miles away, Malcolm stood inside a quiet conference room overlooking the Charlotte skyline, while camera crews made their final adjustments outside the glass doors. A communications director glanced at her tablet. 5 minutes, Malcolm nodded. His phone remained on silent inside his jacket. He had turned off every notification before sunrise. If people wanted answers, they could hear them from him, not through a phone screen. The interview lasted less than 20 minutes. Malcolm spoke calmly about innovation, patience, and solving real-world problems. He thanked his engineers, his attorneys, his mentors. He never mentioned the nights he had worked alone, after everyone else had gone to bed. By noon, his face appeared across financial news websites, business journals, and local television stations. Across Charlotte, people who had never heard his name that morning were suddenly discussing him over lunch. At Celeste's marketing office, employees gathered around the television mounted above the break room coffee station. a founder and majority owner Malcolm Ellison. As Celeste stepped into the room carrying a salad container, she froze, the plastic fork slipped from her hand, and clattered across the tile floor. Nobody noticed, every pair of eyes remained fixed on the television. The company has confirmed Mr. Ellison retained majority ownership throughout the entire negotiation process. One coworker frowned. Wait. She looked directly at Celeste. Isn't that your ex-husband? The room became unusually quiet. Several people turned toward her at once. Celeste forced a small smile. I think so. Another coworker was already searching Malcolm's name online. Within seconds, article after article filled the screen. 3 years of confidential development. Independent ownership, federal patents, multiple rejected acquisition offers, a final agreement worth $280 million. One employee read aloud. Ellison declined several early offers because he refused to surrender long-term control of the company. Another shook his head. That's incredible. Someone looked back at Celeste. You were married to him. She couldn't answer. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. The television continued playing clips from Malcolm's interview. He looked exactly the same calm voice, the same steady posture. Only now the world finally understood what she never stopped long enough to ask about. Her hands began to tremble. She opened another article, then another. Every source confirmed the same timeline. Nothing had happened overnight. Nothing had appeared by luck. Everything had been built quietly while she believed Malcolm's future depended entirely on a job he had already outgrown. A cold weight settled in her chest. She hadn't left because Malcolm failed. She had left only days before the world discovered he had already succeeded. Around her, the conversations continued. I wish I'd thought of something like that. $280 million. No wonder investors were after him. Celeste barely heard them anymore. For the first time since walking out of their house, she wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about the unopened conversations, the unanswered questions. The evenings she stopped listening, because she believed she already knew how Malcolm's story would end. And for the first time, she realized she hadn't walked away from a man who lost everything. She had walked away from the man who had quietly been building everything. The next 48 hours passed faster than Malcolm expected. Interview requests arrived from national business networks, manufacturing conferences, and technology podcasts. His calendar filled quickly. His routine never changed. He still woke before sunrise, still made his own breakfast, still exercised before work, still reviewed every document himself. Success had changed his responsibilities. It had not changed the man behind them. One afternoon, his assistant placed a printed folder on the conference table. Media monitoring. Malcolm opened it. The first pages contained financial headlines. The final section summarized public reactions, social media discussions, and local news coverage. One photograph caught his attention. Celeste stood smiling beside coworkers at a recent charity event. He looked at it for only a moment before quietly closing the folder. Anything important? One board member asked. Malcolm shook his head. No, the meeting continued, across town. Life had become strangely quiet for Celeste. Not because people stopped talking, because they had started asking questions she could no longer answer. Her phone rang constantly. Friends who had congratulated her on moving on now wanted to know whether she had known about Malcolm's company. Relatives she had not spoken to in months suddenly called. Some tried to sound supportive, others sounded curious, a few barely hid their judgment. You mean he built all of that while you were married? You really didn't know? You left him the week before this happened. Each conversation ended the same way. An awkward silence. By Thursday afternoon, Celeste stopped answering the phone. She sat alone inside a neighborhood coffee shop. The tea in front of her had already gone cold. Outside, people walked past without noticing her. Inside, She replayed the last 3 years of her marriage. Weekend trips Malcolm canceled, late-night conference calls behind closed doors. Legal envelopes marked confidential, meetings he never fully explained, she had never asked. She had already decided she knew the answers. Her phone vibrated again. Another business magazine had published a profile of Malcolm. One paragraph held her attention. Ellison rejected multiple acquisition offers over 3 years, choosing long-term ownership instead of immediate financial gain. 3 years. She lowered the phone slowly. During those same 3 years, Malcolm had never missed an anniversary, never forgotten her birthday, never skipped Thanksgiving, never missed Christmas with her parents. He had somehow built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, without making the people he loved feel neglected. A tear finally rolled down her cheek. It wasn't because Malcolm had become wealthy. It was because she realized she had never truly understood the man she married. The waitress approached quietly. "Would you like another tea?" Celeste looked up before offering a small smile. "No, thank you." She gathered her notebook and stood. Halfway to the door, she stopped. Then she turned around, instead of walking to her car. She searched Malcolm Ellison Technologies. The company's website appeared immediately. At the bottom of the page, corporate headquarters visitor registration. She stared at the screen for several seconds, then she pressed the number. Across the city, Malcolm finished another board meeting and gathered his notes. As he stepped toward the elevator, his assistant approached carrying a tablet. "There is someone downstairs asking whether you might have 5 minutes." Malcolm accepted the tablet. The visitor's name appeared on the screen. Celeste Vaughan. Malcolm remained silent for several seconds, before handing the tablet back to his assistant. "Please show Miss Vaughan to conference room 3, he said. "And hold my next meeting." The conference room overlooked the western side of the city. Late afternoon sunlight reflected across the glass buildings, beyond the windows. A pitcher of water and 2 empty glasses rested in the center of the table. Malcolm entered first. He placed a slim notebook beside his chair. Moments later, the door opened. Celeste stepped inside. The confidence she had worn at the courthouse was gone. She paused near the door before quietly taking her seat. Neither of them spoke. The low hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Finally, Celeste broke the silence. "Thank you for seeing me." Malcolm gave a small nod. "You asked for a few minutes." She clasped her hands together. "I know how this looks." He waited. "I didn't come because of the money." Still, Malcolm said nothing. "I came because I finally realized how wrong I was." She looked down at the table. "I kept replaying everything. The late nights, the canceled weekends, the phone calls. I convinced myself your future depended on one company. I never stopped to ask if you were building something bigger." Malcolm looked at her quietly. "You never asked." There was no anger in his voice. "Only truth." Celeste nodded. "I thought I already knew the answer." She swallowed. "When you walked through the front door carrying that cardboard box, I decided your life had fallen apart." Malcolm rested one hand on the notebook. "It hadn't, it was changing." The words hung between them. Celeste looked away. "I thought success was something people showed. I didn't realize. Oh boy. Sometimes people protect it." For the first time, Malcolm's expression softened. "Some things are worth protecting." Silence returned. This time, neither of them hurried to break it. After several seconds, Celeste spoke again. "If I had waited." She stopped herself, then tried again. "If I had trusted you." Malcolm gently shook his head. "This isn't about 1 week. It's about what you believed before that week ever happened." The sentence landed harder than she expected. Her eyes filled. She didn't argue. She couldn't. Malcolm opened the notebook beside him. He removed a sealed envelope that had remained inside since the acquisition papers were signed. He slid it slowly across the table. "I wrote this before everything became public. I was waiting for the right day." Celeste looked at him in confusion, before opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Behind it rested an architectural rendering of a lakeside home. Another document established a charitable foundation in both of their names to provide scholarships for engineering and technology students. At the bottom of the letter, one sentence had been written in Malcolm's familiar handwriting. Together, we finally have the freedom to build the life we always dreamed about. Celeste's fingers began to tremble. The papers slipped into her lap. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe. The future she had imagined was never waiting somewhere else. It had already been waiting for her. Oh, inside the life she chose to leave. Celeste held the letter with both hands as though it might disappear if she loosened her grip. The ink had begun to blur where a single tear landed near the signature. She carefully placed the pages back inside the envelope before looking across the table. Malcolm had not moved. He simply waited with the same quiet patience that had carried him through every difficult season of his life. I kept telling myself I was choosing security, Celeste whispered. Now I realize I was measuring the wrong things. Malcolm nodded gently. Security is not a paycheck, it is character. It is consistency. It is knowing who stands beside you when tomorrow looks uncertain. She lowered her head. I failed that test. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Outside the conference room, employees crossed the hallway carrying laptops and folders. Completely unaware that two lives were reaching their final turning point. Celeste finally broke the silence. Is there any way to repair what I destroyed? Malcolm looked toward the skyline beyond the glass. The afternoon sun stretched across the buildings in long golden reflections. Some things can be rebuilt, he said quietly. Trust is different. It grows slowly and disappears quickly. She nodded as if she had expected that answer long before walking into the building. I wish I had believed in you instead of believing in circumstances. Malcolm folded his hands together. You believed my value changed because my job changed. I never stopped being the same man. Celeste closed her eyes for a brief moment. Every memory now carried a different meaning. The mornings he left before daylight. The evenings he returned tired but hopeful. The promises he made without ever asking for recognition. She had mistaken quiet determination for ordinary ambition. Malcolm reached into his jacket and removed his wedding ring. He placed it carefully on the polished table between them. The small band reflected the sunlight for only a second before becoming still. I wore this because I believed our commitment was stronger than temporary setbacks, he said. I do not regret believing that. Celeste stared at the ring without touching it. Neither do I, she answered softly. I only regret that I stopped believing first. Malcolm stood and straightened his jacket. I truly hope your future brings you peace. His words carried no bitterness and no satisfaction. Only sincerity. Celeste rose slowly from her chair. She understood that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. Malcolm had already forgiven her long before she arrived. What he could not restore was the future they might have shared. He opened the conference room door and stepped into the hallway. Celeste remained inside for another minute, holding the envelope close to her heart, as she quietly accepted that the life she had walked away from could never be recovered. 6 months passed. Autumn settled across Charlotte, covering the tree-lined streets with shades of gold and crimson. Outside a newly completed community learning center, families gathered for the opening ceremony. Near the entrance, a polished stone carried a simple inscription. The Ellison Foundation for Innovation and Opportunity, the scholarship program that had once existed only inside an unopened envelope, had finally become real. Students from working families wandered through classrooms, filled with engineering models, robotics kits, and computer workstations. Malcolm greeted each family personally. He shook every hand, remembered every name he had just been told, listened far more than he spoke. Success had expanded his world. it had never changed who he was. Later that afternoon, a teenage student approached carrying a notebook filled with bridge designs and handwritten calculations. "Mr. Ellison." The boy hesitated. "I want to build things that matter." Malcolm smiled. "So do I." The boy laughed. "So? Or what's the biggest lesson you've learned?" Malcolm looked around the room. Parents talking quietly. Students exploring possibilities they had never imagined. Teachers answering questions. Then he looked back at the boy. "Don't rush to prove your worth. Spend your time becoming someone worth remembering." The student nodded slowly. "I'll remember that. I hope you don't." The boy looked confused. "I hope one day you discover it for yourself." That answer stayed with him long after he walked away. Across town, life had become much quieter for Celeste. She now lived in a modest apartment and worked for a smaller marketing firm. The expensive restaurants, the luxury stuff, the carefully curated lifestyle, all of it belonged to another chapter. Only one thing remained. The envelope. It still rested inside the top drawer of her kitchen table. Every few weeks, she unfolded Malcolm's letter, read it, folded it again, not because it reminded her of what she had lost, because it reminded her of the person she had failed to believe in. One Saturday morning, she volunteered at a neighborhood career fair. As she encouraged teenagers to trust themselves before chasing appearances, she realized she was finally living the lesson she had learned too late. That evening, Malcolm returned to the lakeside house, shown years earlier, in the architectural drawing. The same house, the same dream, just built differently than either of them had imagined. He placed a framed photograph from the Foundation's first scholarship class onto a bookshelf. Dozens of smiling students looked back at him. He stood quietly for a moment, then looked across the calm water beyond the windows. The house was peaceful. Not because it was large, because there was nothing left to prove. Malcolm smiled, turned off the lights, and walked toward tomorrow.